It was past midnight when Edward Lancaster, one of the most successful businessmen in the city, finally returned home. His mansion, perched high on the hills, was bathed in shadows, its grand hall silent except for the faint echo of his polished shoes on the marble floor. He had spent the entire day in meetings and late-night dinners with investors, convinced that working harder meant securing a brighter future for his only daughter. To Edward, the measure of love was what he could provide through money. But that night, as he set his briefcase down and loosened his tie, a sound made him pause. It wasn't silence. It was a soft, almost trembling voice coming from the servants' quarters down the hallway. He followed it, his curiosity piqued. When he reached the doorway, he saw his new maid, Sarah, a woman in her early 30s with tired but kind eyes. She was sitting by the edge of the couch, holding a small figure in her arms. Edward was about to step in when he accidentally brushed against the doorframe. The sound made Sarah look up sharply. "Be silent," she whispered firmly. Edward froze. No one had ever spoken to him like that, especially not a maid. For a moment, his pride bristled, his instinct to demand respect rising. But something in her expression stopped him. She wasn't being disrespectful. She wasn't even looking at him as a master. Her attention was fixed entirely on the child. In her arms, his daughter, Emily. Edward's breath caught in his chest. Emily had been struggling ever since her mother's passing 3 years ago. She barely spoke, barely ate, and rarely smiled. She avoided her father's presence, shutting herself inside her world of silence. No doctor, no therapist, no tutor had been able to reach her. And yet, here she was, asleep in the arms of a woman she had only known for a short while. Sarah's voice was steady, calm, as she sang a quiet lullaby Edward had not heard in years. It was the very same song his late wife used to sing to their daughter. Edward stood in the doorway, stunned. He hadn't heard Emily sleep so peacefully in years. When Sarah finally looked up again, she gently placed a finger to her lips, signaling for him to remain quiet. He obeyed. For once, the great Edward Lancaster stood silently, humbled, watching a scene he couldn't buy with all his millions. Later, when Emily was asleep, Sarah carefully tucked her into bed. Edward followed her out into the hallway, his voice low. How did you do that?" Sarah hesitated, then answered simply, "I didn't do anything magical, sir. I just listened. She told me she misses her mother's song. So I sang it. For her." Those words struck Edward harder than any business loss ever had. He realized he had been so consumed with building an empire, so obsessed with providing financial security, that he had forgotten the most important thing his daughter needed, his presence, his listening ear, his love. From that night on, Edward began to notice things he had long ignored. He saw the way Emily's eyes lit up when Sarah asked about her drawings. He noticed how Emily began to speak more when Sarah encouraged her gently. Sarah didn't treat Emily like a broken child in need of fixing. She treated her like someone who mattered, someone whose voice was worth hearing. Jealousy warred with gratitude in Edward's heart. How was it that a maid, someone from a humble background, could reach his daughter in ways he never could? Yet the more he watched, the more he realized it wasn't about wealth, education, or status. It was about compassion, patience, and love. One rainy evening, Edward came home early and found Emily sitting in the living room with Sarah. Emily was sketching something in her notebook, her small hands moving quickly. When Edward leaned closer, he realized she was drawing her mother, Sarah, and himself together. Tears blurred his vision. For the first time in years, his daughter was imagining a family again. "Daddy," Emily whispered, her voice fragile but clear. "Will you sit with us?" Edward's heart nearly broke. He hadn't heard her call him Daddy since his wife's passing. Without hesitation, he sat down. That simple act began to bridge the distance that grief had built between them. Weeks turned into months, and the bond grew stronger. Edward made changes in his life, cutting down late meetings, spending more time at home, joining Emily and Sarah for dinner. He learned to laugh again, to sit in silence when needed, to listen without always trying to fix. Eventually, Edward discovered more about Sarah's own story. She had lost her husband in a tragic accident and was raising a young son of her own, working multiple jobs to survive. Despite her struggles, she carried herself with quiet dignity, never asking for pity. She understood loss, and that was why she could reach Emily so deeply. One evening, Emily told her father, "Sarah makes me feel like Mommy is still here somehow, not because she replaces her, but because she understands." That night, Edward lay awake thinking about the twists of fate. He had hired Sarah out of necessity, never expecting she would become the missing piece in their lives. She had entered their home as a maid, but she had given them far more than service. She had given them healing. Years later, Edward stood in a small but bustling cafe Sarah had managed to open with his support. The place was filled with warmth, laughter of children, the smell of fresh bread, walls covered with Emily's artwork. Edward often sat in the corner, watching as Sarah greeted every customer with the same kindness she had once shown his daughter. He realized then that wealth was not in the empire he had built, but in the love that filled his home. Emily was thriving. Sarah's dream had come true, and he himself had been transformed from a man blinded by success into a father who finally understood what mattered most. The night he first heard Sarah say, "Be silent," had once confused him. But now he understood. She wasn't silencing him out of defiance. She was teaching him to pause, to listen, to see what was truly important. And in that silence, Edward found the voice of love he had long forgotten. The story of Edward, Emily, and Sarah became more than just a tale of loss and healing. It was a testament to the truth that sometimes the people who enter our lives quietly can end up giving us the loudest lessons. Money can buy many things, but it can never replace the power of presence, compassion, and the courage to love again. And for Edward, those lessons would remain his greatest fortune. In the end, Edward Lancaster understood something no boardroom or business deal had ever taught him. Silence speaks when love is missing, and healing begins when someone truly listens. Sarah had walked into his mansion as a maid, but she gave him back something priceless: his daughter's laughter, his own humanity, and the family he thought he had lost forever. Wealth had always been Edward's shield, but he learned that real wealth wasn't in money, mansions, or contracts. It was in the small moments, the soft lullaby that soothed his daughter, the hand that comforted her tears, the courage to sit together and feel whole again. Sarah's quiet strength showed him that sometimes the most powerful words are not grand speeches, but gentle reminders to be silent and notice what truly matters. For in that silence, Edward discovered love, healing, and the chance to start over. And so, what began as a late-night shock turned into a lifelong lesson. Family is not just blood, but the bonds of compassion and kindness we choose to nurture. And that, above all else, is the greatest fortune any millionaire or any human can ever have.